Great, so we were only anticipating 2 schools, so I'm going to assume that they're both joined with the 2 attendees that we've had join the webinar, so welcome. So I'm briefly just going to introduce the event and myself. So hello, my name is Dr. Neve Chapman, and this event is all about talking about our stories, my fellow panelists, about how we got into science and how we're interested in communicating science with our community and how we make that accessible and interesting and fun. So I'd like to begin today's event with a brief acknowledgement of country and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we're all gathering today. So for myself and the panelists, we're in Lutruwita, Tasmania. So we're paying respects to the Palawa people as we meet across Aboriginal land, sea and waterways. On behalf of everyone, I would just like to recognise a history of truth that acknowledges the impacts of invasion and colonisation upon Aboriginal people, resulting in the forcible removals from their land, and say that I stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language, and history. So today's event is really to have some interactions. If you do have any questions, please let me know by popping them in the Q&A box, and then I will make sure that they are directed to one of our panelists. But for now, I'd really like to introduce a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to pass to each of our panelists for you to find out a bit more about them. So my name is Neve, and I'm from Ireland, although my accent's very soft now. And I'm a medical researcher, so I'm really interested in how we look after people's hearts. And I like to use technology to see if we can improve the way doctors find out who's at risk of having a heart attack or a stroke. And I really love talking about science and telling stories so that we can show everyone how cool science is, but also how varied it is and how different a career in science looks like. So I'm going to pass to my other panelists, and I'd first like to go to Bridget to tell me a little bit about yourself, where you currently work, and why you chose to pursue science.
Kia ora, my name is Bridget, and I currently work or study at the University of Tasmania. I'm a PhD candidate there, studying freshwater ecology, looking at the insects that live in our rivers and how they respond to agricultural stress and to flow reductions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why I chose to pursue science. So I grew up walking around this beautiful country of New Zealand, exploring the natural environment, and I became really fascinated as to what was going on. And I always knew I wanted to do something in science and something about what was going on in our natural environment. I took a freshwater ecology paper in my second year at university and was astounded at the amount of life living in these rivers that I grew up walking through, and here I am today.
Thank you, Bridget. Your enthusiasm is infectious, and I love the way that you found a connection of wonder to something that's so familiar to you from your childhood. So next, I'd like to introduce Indrani and tell us a little bit about yourself and also what you love about science.
Thank you, Niam. Hello, everyone. My name is Indrani Mukherjee, originally from India, but have lived in Australia for the last 7 years. Did my PhD at the University of Tasmania, and currently am a postdoctoral researcher in geoscience. And I specifically work on really, really old rocks that are almost 1 billion or more years old. And I try and understand the chemistry of the rocks that were deposited in our past oceans to interpret what our oceans looked like 1 billion years ago and what the life might have been like in those oceans 1 billion years ago. So that's my current research interest, and really fascinated about geoscience. But I have to say, what got me interested into science was my chemistry teacher back in school. Up until I met her, really, or she started teaching us, it was about just going through the texts and just going through rote learning. But I think she really directed us towards thinking, not just observing, but also thinking about why it is the way it is. And I think that really sparked my interest in science in general. And the field of science I'm involved with is geoscience. And you can I look at rocks on a micron level scale to structures that are 1 kilometer or more long. So the whole breadth of something that's so small and significant to something so large and significant really piqued my interest, and that's why I love science.
Thanks, Indrani. I love the way that you're looking from something so tiny that it's naked to the common eye to something that's so huge that we couldn't look at it within one simple focal point either. Okay, so next I'd like to go to Dr. Penny Jones. So Penny, tell us a little bit about yourself and also what a typical day working in science looks like for you.
Cool. Hi, everyone. So I come from a family of scientists, and I tried to be a black sheep by doing a Bachelor of Arts, but it obviously didn't work because I've ended up being a scientist. That's okay. So my BA actually ended up being very kind of geography, ecology, and enviro studies focused. And then I went and did an honours in paleoecology, which is the ecology of the past environment. So I used lake sediments to reconstruct climate change and vegetation and fire in the past, which is pretty super cool. And I then went on to do a PhD in archaeology, but it was more archaeological science. So I was using isotopes in bones and seeds from archaeological sites to reconstruct climate change and how people responded to that. And then I kind of ended up in medical research. So I'm mostly now based at the Menzies Institute for Medical Research, along with Neve, and I mostly work for a team looking at how the environment affects our health, particularly pollen, as well as bushfire smoke. So I do a lot of work now, really applied research into bushfire smoke, pollen, and health. And also our team run a smartphone app called Aerator. And so I'm really heavily involved in that as well. In terms of what my typical day looks like, it's hugely diverse, but what it doesn't involve anymore is being in the lab. Certainly when I was doing my honours and PhD, I spent loads of time in the lab, cutting up bits of lake sediment and looking down a microscope, or crushing up bones and teeth. And I learned to use a dentist drill. That was pretty cool. Drilling into 4,000-year-old cow teeth. That was cool. But now I mostly have other people doing my data collection for me, which in some ways I miss the lab, but other ways I get to do work on a hugely diverse range of projects. And I'm really lucky to work in a really, really interdisciplinary team. We've got atmospheric modelers, we've got people doing pollen counting, people looking at the microbiome, people doing kind of more social research into how people use the Aerator app. So I work on a really diverse range of projects with students, with other postdocs, and I also do a lot of work interacting with people in the government and then people in the community. So I do a lot of that sort of more science, like translating science into practice, as well as a really big part of my role. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. That sounds really diverse, and I'd love to pick your brain more about the transition of looking to the past to looking to the future in one science career. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce Dr. Emily Fleece and ask you to introduce yourself in a bit more detail and tell us what you love about science.
Thanks, Neve. Yeah, so my name's Emily and I'm from the US. So I grew up in upstate New York, and similar to Penny, I did a Bachelor of Arts. I was interested in people and wanted to understand why we do what we do. So I studied psychology and anthropology. And then I realized that there weren't many job openings looking for psychological anthropologists. So I just looked around for whatever jobs there were at the time and which of them I wanted to do. And I ended up doing outdoor education and teaching kids about stream ecology and forest ecology and outdoor survival skills for a couple of years. And then I found that I missed studying, and spending all that time outside also got me thinking about the connections between human health and the health of the environment, watching those kids interact with streams and how happy they were being outdoors. So I went back for a degree in a Master's of Science. I studied disease ecology to understand one of the ways that we're connected to the environment is through parasites and infectious diseases. So I studied a tick-borne bacteria in my master's, and then a mosquito-borne virus in my PhD, which I did in Australia. And I sort of continued on that theme and continued looking at how human health and environmental health are connected. And I now am exploring urban health and how cities impact human health. And one of the ways they do that is through exposing us to different microbial communities, which can impact our health in different ways. And so I work now as a lecturer and research fellow in the School of Natural Sciences and Biological Sciences. And one of the things that I love about science, and having transitioned from a Bachelor of Arts to a couple science degrees, is it provides a really nice framework for answering questions. And that's important because answering questions allows you to inform decision making. So, for example, my work looks at those connections between health and the environment. And I've done some epidemiology along the way. And so some of my work can inform whether we should use an urban space to build an apartment complex or to retain a park or forest area. And some of it can inform whether we should be going into lockdowns, whether we should be, what we should be doing to control COVID. The other thing that I love about science, along with informing decision-making, is the independence of being a scientist. So this pathway really allows you to pick what you want to do and what you want to study. And you can pick things that you think are important. So I've chosen the pathway that I have because my work can both support human health and also potentially support conservation. And so having that independence and also the potential for impact is one of the things I love about science.
Thank you, Emily. And I would definitely second that as a science career for fostering like curiosity, but having freedom to just be like, oh, that's interesting and important. I'm gonna like look at that. It's probably my favorite thing about science. So last but definitely not least, my dear friend Kelsey Pickard, could you please introduce yourself and also tell us a little bit about what a typical day looks like for you?
Sure. So hi everyone, my name's Kelsey. I'm a PhD student at the School of Natural Sciences at the University of Tasmania. And I'm studying plant genetics. So I'm part botanist, part geneticist, and I'm looking at how plants decide when to flower. So how they measure things like day length, seasons, temperature to determine when they're going to put out a flower and make seeds. And I guess the overall goal is to try and better understand how plants do this so we can increase our food yields. A typical day for me can vary quite a lot, and that's something I really love about being a scientist, is that it's different every day almost. So because I grow my plants in glass houses, I need to go and check them, do measurements on them, see if they've flowered. Also, because I have a lot of molecular lab work, I'm in the lab quite a lot, doing all sorts of cool experiments, playing with DNA, extracting the DNA out of the plants, having a look at it. But also, because I'm involved in a lot of science communication, which we'll get into shortly, I spend a lot of time also at my computer trying to juggle all of the different projects I've got on at the moment.
Yeah, juggling is a key skill, huh? Okay, so thanks. That's our panel. So just a reminder to those that joined after we jumped straight in. So we've just introduced everybody and given a little bit of a flavor for what we enjoy about science and why we're pursuing a career in science. If you have any questions for our panelists, you can pop them in the Q&A box, and I'll be checking that regularly to ask to our panelists, but also we have someone monitoring the Q&A box who can answer your questions about potentially enrolling in university or studying at the University of Tasmania. Okay, so what we're talking about is a connection with communities, and I think that's something that's really important to all of us. We've kind of talked individually about why we've pursued science and why we enjoy it, but I'd really like to focus on why or how you think, it's important to and how you have brought that science out to the community. So first I'd like to go to Indrani, and I'd like to hear a little bit about what you've done, because I think that you've been really passionate about mentorship and sharing your research with international communities back in India.
Yeah, so not just in India, just in Australia as well. When you have students here, we're quite a multicultural here, as well as back home, where it's people or students from different parts of the country. And yeah, in India, it's like Europe. Every part of the country has its distinct culture, language, food, you name it. So yeah, so it's been very interesting in the sense that when I do outreach in Australia, there is this general sort of homogeneous curiosity about also what's geology about, and is it all about mining, and do you just mine things? And because geology is not just about mining, I've got lots to talk about. The questions are somewhat different back home. I think you see girls' eyes just sort of light up because they think, hang on, does that mean we can get there? We can do a PhD from overseas. So when I started doing outreach, I'd already finished my PhD here. And so that was more like, oh, so I can pursue science overseas as well as here. And yeah, because back home, the grayer your hair is, the more seriously you are taken. So to begin with, I don't think I was taken that seriously. Like, seriously, we need to hear prof, if you know what I mean. But they do warm up to you. And then the questions are, again, like I said, very different to the ones that I have here. But either way, I think, like you just said, Niam, it's incredibly important to communicate the passion. They may not understand you. So when I was doing outreach, it was geology, and perhaps some of the stuff about uranium lead dating went over their heads. But what they do note is the passion with which you deliver this. And I think it doesn't matter whether they understand it or not. They just think of it as, oh, wow, that's really, she's really keen. Maybe I'll look into it as well. Or they recognize the passion, and even if they can find passion in some other science subject other than geology, they can still see through that. And so, yeah, that's the difference that I have noted in general between my outreach activities in Australia and India. And yeah, this is the time when they are, kids are very, very curious. And they could go anywhere. I'd like all of them to do geoscience, but like I said, if Emily and I were doing outreach, I'm sure she'd drag 50% into biology, and I hope I get the rest of them. But yeah, this is a very important time for kids because they're thinking about all sorts of things. And we're really salesmen right now trying to say, do the science, it's amazing, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think it's really true about that infectious passion and kind of demonstrating that as part of your career. Bridget, I know that you've also done a lot of communicating your science or using science as a communication tool with local communities in New Zealand. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you. So I worked for a charity back in New Zealand called Working Waters Trust, where we worked with both young people and landowners and stakeholders to share our passion for freshwater. We called it Spreading Galaxid Love. Galaxids are a species or a family of fish. So we went around sharing fish love however we could. So I'll just share a couple of my experiences. One was a project called Urban Eel, where we worked with young people and connected them to a really charismatic species, the longfin eel, which travel all the way to Tonga to breed, which is amazing. It's a 2,000-kilometer journey, which is an amazing animal. And they live in our urban streams, which honestly don't look that fantastic. They're a bit goopy, they smell a bit weird, they've got a lot of rubbish in them, all that fun stuff. And they don't look like something that young people should care about because of the way they're treated by our communities. But by connecting young people with this animal, the longfin eel, they learned to care about these rivers because these rivers are the eel's home. And then eventually what we worked on was getting these young people to take actions. And a really special moment for me was attending a meeting where a young group of students from a school, they were both aged 12, met with some city councillors to discuss improving stream habitat by adding boulders and by adding plants along the edges, and developed this amazing plan to restore this little stretch of river that was right next to their school. So that was really eye-opening for me. Another really cool piece of work we did was looking after mudfish, koala, which are endangered in Canterbury. So they are sort of just as endangered as maybe the swift parrots in Tasmania, if that's something that you need a comparison for, but they have very little protection and they're mostly occurring on private property. So we worked with landowners who often didn't even know they had mudfish on their property, A, to understand that they're a really amazing species. They can live in dry areas for up to 3 months. They don't need water. They can burrow in the mud, which I find incredible. And a lot of people do find incredible if they know about them. We did restoration work on a property where we did plantings and added ponds and that sort of thing, those sorts of things. And then we invited school students along to those properties so they could experience this and work with the landowners who could then see who they were protecting these beautiful fish for. So I guess a lot of what I've learned through all of this is firstly listening to landowners and people that you're interacting with. A lot of these stories are really important, and you listen to them, you can incorporate your ideas into their stories, which is something that I find really important. I think that everybody has a really natural curiosity and really naturally care for their environment. And if you share some of these really cool facts about different animals or the way different environments work, you'll build their passion, enthusiasm for it slowly over time. And then I think just approaching everything with kindness and understanding that different people have different experiences that lead them to hold the current views that they have. And it's really important that we understand those views may not be the same as ours, and they may not necessarily be scientific as we're seeing at the moment with vaccinations, for example, but they may have developed that viewpoint because of their own experiences. And if we talk about those, I think that's really the way to get the scientific conversation going and come to a place of understanding, and then a place where we can all move forward and create really positive change.
Yeah, I love the way that you're really humanizing some important topics. And I totally agree with you that we should be kind to people when we're talking about science, because I really strongly feel that sometimes we can become a little bit elitist in the way that we talk about science. And I hated science in high school, and I also did a Bachelor of Arts to start with because I was rebelling against it. And I think a lot of that was just because I didn't feel smart enough to keep up. And I think a little bit of kindness can go a long way. And I think you're absolutely right. We just need to foster that curiosity among people. Thank you. And again, just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can pop them in the Q&A box. So we're going to change tact a little bit, where we've kind of focused on going out to schools, maybe engaging with those who are engaging younger communities. And we're going to go to a slightly more adult theme, where so Kelsey and Emily have taken their hobbies or enjoyment. Oh, I'm going to need to stand up. 2 seconds. Here we go. Good old sensor lighting. So Kelsey and Emily have taken their love for the pub and for a bit of a beer to new heights, and are using that social pastime to engage with communities. So Emily, I'd really like to go to you first, because I think you've been running Science in the Pub for a little bit longer. So could you tell us a little bit about why you decided to start Science in the Pub, what it is first, and why you started it, and why you think it's important to kind of meet people where they are socially?
Yeah, thanks, Neve. Yeah, so it's not just that, I love pubs and I want to bring everyone there and talk about science. So I started Science in the Pub first in Adelaide in 2014, and then here in Tasmania, SciPub Tas, in 2015. And we've since then, both organizations have been running monthly events in the pub ever since. And the reason we started it was really to make science more inclusive. So, a couple of us mentioned that science didn't feel like something that was welcoming to us as women, or for whatever reason at first. And to me, that's a really important problem, because I think science can answer a lot of the questions in our society. But if people are rejecting science, sort of like what Bridget mentioned with vaccines, if we're rejecting science, it actually can have a pretty negative impact on our whole society. So we decided to bring science to the pub as a neutral environment, as a place where academics, who sometimes people put in this ivory tower and think are, separate from society and are condescending and, live in a different world, bringing them to the pub where it might feel more comfortable for people to come and listen and engage with those ideas. Folks who might not go to a lecture at the university that might feel excluded from that sort of place. So we can meet them, like you said, Neve, where they are. And so, yeah, we've been doing that for a long time, and feel like it's a pretty nice way of connecting the public with the scientists, and so people can realize that scientists aren't scary, and they're usually not jerks. Most of us are pretty nice, and are passionate about our work and are doing it not for fame and fortune, because for most of us we won't be famous or make a lot of money, but because we think it's important. And so that, yeah, we've been doing that with Science of the Pub to change perceptions there. The other couple of things that we've been doing, we did a Science in the Park event where we also brought the scientists out to a local park and did a lot of hands-on activities with families. And that was really fun. And we hosted that in one of the lower income suburbs in the Hobart area to connect people from that area with science and make it more accessible. And then my favorite program that we also are doing is the Inspiring Women in STEM program, which offers financial support, a small pocket of money for a couple of applicants each year. We've now run it for 2 years and hosted 7 different women as fellows. And it supports them to run some activities or programs in their community, wherever they're from, to be able to connect with youth there, show them what a scientist can look like and what a scientist can do, and be a potential role model for youth in their community. And so that's been a really fun activity. I've got to meet some incredible, inspiring female PhD students from UTAS and see them do incredible things and connect with a lot of youth that way. So yeah, that's a couple of things we've been doing.
You're a busy person, Emily, for sure. But that's awesome. And I think it's a really great way to meet people where they are and kind of break down some of those barriers to science. So Kelsey, you are breaking down some of the mystery of potentially some of Australia's favorite drink with Science Made Bearable. So tell us a little bit about what it is, but also like the rationale behind why you decided to start talking about the science behind beer.
Yeah, sure. So I run a science blog called Science Made Bearable, B-E-E-R-able. And basically, I'm not a beer scientist. I don't brew. I'm just a big fan of drinking beer. But I'm also really interested in the science behind it, how it's made. And so I really like the challenge of breaking complex topics or, deep, complex scientific topics down into digestible sort of snippets of information. And I feel like being someone from outside of brewing, it's like another language. So I saw that as a challenge to really dive into the science, understand it, and then be able to spit it out the other end, not the beer, the science, to explain to members of the public how beer is made and why the science behind it is really cool. The reason I think this is really important and really enjoy science communication, I think stems from my childhood, or basically being the first woman or first person in my whole family to go to university. So my parents both didn't finish high school. I'm the oldest of 2 kids. My brother did end up going to uni, but he did an arts degree, much like you guys. But I was the first person to go to university, definitely the first and only scientist in my family. So I've been used to having to sort of explain science to people who don't understand it, just at the dinner table, or going to visit grandma and having to try and tell her how I study plants, and I think I really enjoyed that challenge, and I see the value of it, and I think it has huge implications for society if scientists are able to better break down their complex science topics. Especially for tackling misinformation. I mean, these days when there's so much misinformation online, you can Google vaccines or climate change or genetically modified foods, and you're going to come up, the first hits most likely will be misinformation, because that's what people are clicking on, that's what people are sharing, this fear-mongering, misinformation. And so if we can build up some trust in scientists with members of the public, if they can see, look, you see this panel of 6 women here, we're all normal, lovely, I think, people, trustworthy, and if people can see that we're not, scary, evil men in white coats who have a hidden agenda, I think they'll better trust the information that we have to share with them. So I think it's super important that scientists are going out there and talking to members of the public, be it school children, but also adults, because I think by the time people are older, they're set in their ways, they already have made their minds up. And so I feel like we should really target that audience, as well as younger generations, but the older generations definitely are stuck in their ways. And I think we can hopefully make some change by talking directly to them. My bear audience are not that, they're not people who believe misinformation most of the time, but I feel like it was quite a nice challenge to dive into a whole different audience, just people who like to drink beer, and introduce them to the science behind it. So
yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept, because even as someone who works in science, I find the science of beer very intimidating. So I enjoy your blog because it informs me. Okay, so last but not least, Penny. So you and I have talked many times about the importance of art intersecting with science, and I think because your family are they're scientists and you try to rebel.
Oh no, my sister did genetics and then became an opera singer. So
wow, that is an interesting career trajectory.
That's right. Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you've done to kind of humanize science again, and maybe reach a different audience by using art as a medium.
Absolutely. It's lots of fun. And I have to say, I think I was obviously destined to take this path, because when I was in primary school and high school, I was a performer in a science theatre troupe, I suppose you'd call it. We did a whole range of fun plays. We did plays about the ozone hole, and we did plays about viruses. I got to play influenza virus and get killed 3 times dramatically on the stairs. It was great. Genetic engineering, all sorts of things. So look,
that sounds awesome. I want to see all those shows.
Oh, look, it was fantastic. I think there are some dodgy DVDs from the 90s somewhere. Anyway, moving on. Now that I'm a real proper scientist, I've picked that back up again. Partly, I was interested in science and the arts, but I've also conveniently got a very good friend who's a visual artist. And a few years ago now, I started collaborating with her. She was doing an exhibition called Waiting for Water, about sort of water cycles in different parts of Australia. So I worked with her and a few other artists on that, and I provided some scientific perspectives on the water cycle in different areas, and really responded. I wrote some written pieces to go along with their artwork, and that was great fun. And we've sort of gone from there. We've written a education resource together for an exhibition by an artist called Patricia Piccinini, who I'd never heard of, but is actually internationally incredibly famous, that explores some amazing themes, both from an artistic and a scientific perspective, on things like evolution, the ethics of CRISPR gene editing, the sort of future possibilities that could arise from using scientific techniques like this. So really big picture, absolutely fascinating stuff. We created a little film last year about artistic and scientific responses to bushfire and fire-affected landscapes, and the really different perspectives that art and science give us on something like a bushfire disaster, and how they can both help us work together on that. This year we're doing a project involving art, music, bit of performance and science on deep time in Tasmania. So we're getting some fabulous musicians together. And again, I'm going to sort of create a piece around the geological history and deep time of Tasmania, and the musicians are going to play, and Amy's going to create art as we go, and it's going to be awesome. So yeah, a whole range of things. And yeah, I think I'm really passionate about it. One, because it's fun. I really enjoy my science day job, but I suppose tend more towards the music rather than the visual arts, but I really enjoy performance and being creative as well. And so I suppose it lets me express that part of myself. But also I think, like, why is it important? I think in some ways, going back to what I was saying about really big themes, I mean, most of the things that all of us are working on relate to pretty big questions, not just about, what's your scientific results say, but, you know, how do we want to live in this world? And what do we want our future to look like? And I think, you know, science can, you know, provide some incredibly important input to that, but adding the arts really bridges that gap and, yeah, lets you ask those big questions and grapple with the fundamentally ethical and social questions that are actually at the heart of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also think that by using the arts, we reach different people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And that and that's really important. Like a bit to what Kelsey was saying, you don't want to just write everybody off because they're 18 and they haven't decided to go for science yet. I think we need to strive to still engage those people and, like you say, think about the big questions as a whole society rather than just the people that like science.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it can be a much more effective means, because again, it's a different way of, we don't all take in information in the same way. So I think, and by making something fun, by making something memorable, I mean, people, you know, cultures around the world have used stories and performances as a mechanism for a reason there to work. Yeah, and I think just lastly on this whole reaching out to communities, so Kelsey and I work on a podcast that I think focuses a lot on telling stories. That's what I call science. It's also a radio show, but we focus on telling stories that celebrate the like hidden types of science that actually occur and are really critical of it too, but also celebrate diverse people in science. So I really enjoyed like just hearing all these different stories, but I think particularly what I've enjoyed is hearing from different experts and really seeing their passion come through, but also hearing from Indigenous knowledge experts as well about how that can shape and inform our understanding of the way the world works. And probably some of those ethical episodes have been the ones I've enjoyed most, particularly like gene editing and stuff. But we do have a question in the Q&A box. So the question is, hi, I'm a year 9 student, really passionate about the environment. Do I have to wait to go to uni to get involved, or is there anything I can do now? And I think Bridget is really well placed to answer that question.
Awesome. Well, it's really good to hear that you're super interested in the environment and want to get involved. That's fantastic. And absolutely, you don't have to wait to go to university to start to get involved. I'm not sure where you're from, or do you know me or anyone? But I'm sure there are local groups in your area that would love to work with you. I'm sure if you contacted the university, there'd probably be someone there that would.
They're based in New South Wales.
New South Wales, awesome. So I'm sure there'll be people that will be willing to take you under their wing. There's so many of us just want to meet enthusiastic people and do exciting and cool things with them. So that's one way you can get involved. And like I said, conservation groups are really good if you're into that sort of thing. Going along on monitoring events or tree planting or cleanups, all of those are really fantastic ways to get involved.
Yeah, and you might be able to do something like the science experience or something similar where you could be looking at what's just in your backyard. So if somebody on our team, Ollie Dove, is interested in helping people engage with that. But also, Emily, that's a bit up your street, isn't it? Backyard biodiversity and all that. So do you have any extra tips to add?
Well, I was just going to say there are backyards for wildlife is one that's a good one at connecting you with what's around your immediate area. But I would just also recommend you could reach out to local bush care groups that do conservation for your local areas. And yeah, you can also reach out to people at the university, your local university, and see if they're looking for field assistance or help with research, because that's a really fun way both to engage with the topic you're passionate about. You can work in the environment and do things like, you know, catch birds in mist nets or catch insects in streams, or just get to know the plants and the trees and get some research experience while you're at it. So if that's of interest to you, that's a nice way to go.
Thanks, Emily. So we don't have any other questions in the chat box, but we have about 5 minutes left. So I wanted to ask you something that, particularly in the last year, that's really surprised me about science is how much we have. Oh, somebody is typing a question, but so I'll just finish. So is how much we get to work with policy and informed decision makings on a really big scale. I think we've seen that play out in COVID. So I wonder, Indrani, is there anything that surprised you about working in science?
You mean in the last year or so, or because of the?
Just in general, like from what you thought pursuing science might look like as an undergraduate to now, or like even in high school, is there anything that surprised you?
Yeah,
like when I was in school, I thought it'd be stuffy and just scribbling on a whiteboard all the time, but it's so the opposite.
Yeah, I did mean to say I was quite interested in history when I was really young, but also back home, and this is India, there's this culture that science is really tough, and it's only for very, very smart people, and like girls obviously weren't smart enough when I was growing up. So yeah, that was another reason that I was like, no, I'm going to do it, just to show that anyone can do science. So that was actually another reason, which I've gone past that now. That I had ego issues before, not anymore. But the other thing that really has changed is, like I said, back home, your seniors, whatever they tell you or the way they direct you matters a lot. Whereas one of the first things that was told to me when I came here by my PhD supervisor in Australia was, you can disagree with me. And that was, I cannot tell you how liberating it was, because all of a sudden I realized that I am allowed to question, and I could, because it was my PhD. So it's your research. You have to own it. And it was a great feeling for me, because even when I was wrong, I knew it. You'd know it after you'd made the mistake. But that option of thinking for yourself was quite liberating. So I thought that changed a lot in my upbringing with science. It was more like, do as you're told. They're seeing it to you, they're obviously right, they're more experienced, and most of it is quite right. But I do feel sometimes we're held back because you don't take that extra step forward, thinking, actually, hang on, there could be an alternative explanation to what's been informed. So that has changed a lot. And I think as you go up the ranks, you realize that some things that were very never crossed my mind, diversity, never crossed my mind, women in science. I think I was too low in the ranks to just fend for myself. Whereas now I think the more I go up the ranks, in the sense that after my honors, PhD, now I'm a postdoc, I really see the value of participating in panels like this, or doing outreach, or it's just suddenly it's something that I am very mindful of. That never crossed my mind when I was, because I think I was too busy trying to set myself up. But yeah, that has changed, I would say, with me, and I'm a lot more passionate about that now, because I truly see the value of having the conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. One of my, especially that change in what you think you know and don't know. One of my favorite quotes is 50% of what we know is wrong, but we just don't know which 50%. So we do have another question in the chat, which is, I'm going to direct this at Kelsey first, because you seem to have had you knew you wanted to do science, and maybe Bridget too then afterwards. How did you work out what science subject to do at uni? So Kelsey, do you want to go first?
That's a good question, and it feels like a really important decision when you're in high school looking at doing a degree, but it's not that important. Basically, is my first point, but just choose what you're interested in. If you like biology, take biology. If you like chemistry, take chemistry. There are so many chances later on in your degree at uni that you can pre-select your subjects. Basically, it's very different to high school, where you get to choose exactly what you're interested in and study exactly what you're interested in. You no longer have to take subjects that you don't really care about to a degree, sort of. But basically, you can shape your degree as you go. So you might start out in your first year really broad. You want to take all of these different subjects. They don't really make sense adding them up together, but that doesn't matter. And as you progress, if you really like one subject more, or if you like those lecturers, so those teachers, you might end up going down a completely different path to what you thought you would. For my experience, I actually went to university to study human genetics, which doesn't sound that different to plant genetics, but it is because it's a whole different study species. I was really interested in human reproduction. I wanted to be a genetic counsellor. And then when I had first taken some of my first year zoology subjects and botany subjects, I took one botany subject just to make up the extra points. And it turned out to be my favourite subject. It completely shifted my whole focus of my degree. And so I could have never predicted that coming out of high school that I would have ended up in plant science. I thought plants were extremely boring, but it just happened that I had a good teacher at university. So you can't really plan it super well. You just have to go with the flow. Yeah.
I agree. And I also think, look at this panel, 50% of us did Bachelor of Arts to start with, and then we ended up in science. So you don't feel stuck. I remember I felt so stuck after my first year of arts. I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that it is past 2:45. So if anybody wants to duck off, they can. But I think most of us have it in our diaries and we're happy to stay until 2. So if the other panelists need to leave, that's also fine. But I think we would be happy to take another couple of questions in the Q&A if you'd like. And with that in mind, I'm going to continue to Bridget to be like, was your path also, you know, that you knew what you wanted to do, but you then had a couple of good lecturers? Or how did you end up deciding what to study at uni?
So I want to reiterate what Kelsey said in that I acknowledge it's really hard in high school to know what you want to do, and you don't have to choose in high school. You can go to university and try a bunch of different things and figure out what you want to do. For me, I think I knew I wanted to go into the sciences because I was really curious and I found science fascinating in high school. I ended up going down 2 pathways kind of simultaneously. I took a biochemistry paper in first year and loved it, and ended up with a second major in biochemistry at the end of my degree, just through following that passion. And then I was doing biological sciences simultaneously. And at the end of my degree, I had amazing lecturers, one of whom became my honours supervisor. And his passion for freshwater ecology really hooked me, and that's how I ended up here. So I had a really amazing lecturer, but I also had the chance to sort of wander and explore and figure out where I wanted to get to by trying a bunch of stuff. So I just say, try what you want to try and follow paths, all sorts of paths, and you'll end up where you choose.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think, so something that I don't remember receiving a lot of advice about was, but that I feel like holds true to me was, I'm much better at identifying what I don't like. So I just went through uni by being like, ooh, I didn't like that kind of subject. I'm going to focus on these ones that I liked a little bit more. So that's also totally fine. Like I just didn't really find cancer or genetics, sorry, Kelsey, interesting at all at university. So I just kept choosing the alternates. But my degree also didn't have that many options. Emily or Penny, would either of you like to talk about how you decided what to do in uni, but particularly Emily, where you kind of like did something and then went back and did a master's? Maybe if you wanted to start, like how did you make that choice to go back?
Yeah, neat, good question. I would first reiterate what Kelsey said. Just follow your passions, and I was really lucky to have parents that encouraged that of me. And I think, you know, when I finished my Bachelor of Arts and realized that nobody wanted to hire me, I was like, why didn't they just tell me to follow a job and get a job? Should have done engineering or packaging or whatever. But I now realize their wisdom, as I often do, is that it is more, I think it is better to follow your passions because you're more likely to do it well. So if you love what you're doing, you do it well. And I think that's more important to create a career path for you. So yeah, I took a whole bunch of different subjects and took more of the ones that I found interesting and figured out which majors that would get me in the end, and accepted whatever those majors were. And then, yeah, I worked for a while, and then I missed learning. I missed being in academia and being in this environment where you were supposed to be learning all the time. Yeah, so then I just
I
looked
think
at,
it's one of the greatest privileges of academia. It's just like your job is to learn all the time.
yeah, I loved that. Yeah, going to
Which sounds like
seminars, hearing all
exhausting,
these
but-
interesting things, even if they weren't my field, just, yeah, I found that really fascinating.
Yeah. So Penny, I was wondering, I really liked earlier how you talked about the way your career's kind of meandered. And I was talking to a student recently who's thinking of doing honours and going into research. And she was saying she felt really conflicted because she wanted to do lab work, but she was really focused on doing research in the real world, so not just in the lab. And I was trying to say there's so many ways in which you can do that. And we ended up talking about the gut microbes that live in our body. And I was like, you could be looking at those with poo samples one day, and then you could be out giving different diets to other people the next day. So I wondered, could you talk about that and how you've kind of made decisions to shape the types of career you want to have and the types of work you want to do as that's evolved?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I can also really relate to that. Certainly a big consideration for me. I've always had this I actually also, before I did my PhD, between honours and my PhD, I worked in the Victorian Public Service for a few years in environmental policy. And yeah, I've always kind of had that real drive that I want to be like solving the world's problems and having a really, really direct impact. So, and sometimes it can be like throughout my PhD, which as I said was in archaeological science, like I loved it. I absolutely loved it, and it was fascinating because I've always been fascinated by that interaction between people and the environment, particularly in the past. Like one of the things that got me into my honours was the whole debate about what happened to the megafauna and things like that. So always been really fascinated by it, and I love doing it, but I had this kind of little bugbear on my shoulder, like I should be sure this relates to climate change and food security, and it is a really important thing to be thinking about, but is it, for what I want personally, is that directly applied enough? And that's part of the reason as well why I really love my current job, because I am still doing kind of, okay, I'm not in the lab anymore, but I'm managing students and research assistants who are doing lab work on things like the microbiome, in my case, not the gut microbiome, but the environmental microbiome, the microbiome of the air around us. Work a lot with Emily, actually. And yeah, how that affects our health. So, but, like we're working on microbiome samples, for example, that we went and collected in backyards from Hobart and playgrounds from Hobart last year, that we can then take and say, hey, well, actually, look, we think that the urbanisation in Hobart is affecting the microbiome in these ways, and this is important for all of these reasons. And we're working really closely with Hobart City Council and state governments, et cetera, So I think there definitely are ways in which you can, it's not an either or an or, definitely.
Yeah, I think you can really, that's one of the things that I love about science, you can shape what you're doing, which actually links really nicely to our last question in the Q&A box. I'm going to ask everyone what your favorite thing is, and I want like just a short sentence answer because we're over time. So my favorite thing is that you can choose your own adventure. I loved those stories when I was a kid. It's like, I think this is interesting and I want my day job to look like that. You come up with a good enough reason why we should do it, you can do it. So Kelsey, what's your favorite thing about science, about being a scientist?
My favourite thing about being a scientist is that we're learning every day, and I know that there are probably all of those high school students watching going, oh, because they're so sick of learning, because it's kind of forced learning in high school. But once you reach uni and get into postgraduate, learning is great. You'll really miss it if you get a 9-to-5 job that's the same every day. Learning is a huge privilege and super enjoyable.
Thank you. And Bridget, coming to you next, Emily.
What I really love is being able to follow my curiosities and passions every single day. If I find something in my subject that I find interesting, I get to look it up and it's really relevant, and that's fantastic. I love it.
Thanks, Bridget. So Emily, what do you love about being a scientist?
Yeah, independence and impact, getting to choose what I want to do, what I want to work on every day, so that I think, and I get to work on something that I think will make the world better.
Thanks, Emily. And Penny, what do you love about being a scientist?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, like the independence is pretty darn good, but also, yeah, going back to that, what I was saying about solving problems. I mean, sure, maybe I'm solving the problems of the world in a different way I would be in policy, but I'm still, yeah, it's a fascinating. You get your results back and you work out what it all means and then why it's important, and you tell that story, and that's really exciting.
It is exciting. And Indrani, last but not least, what do you love about being a scientist?
I love the fact that I get to travel so much as a geologist, and also the fact that I can look at rocks that are billion years old and can answer why life exists on Earth in the first place. It's just fascinating.
That's pretty big. Okay, well, thank you to our really engaged schools and to listening. So this has been recorded, so it will be shared afterwards if that's relevant to you, or to tell your colleagues how much you enjoyed it and how great it would be to watch. I'd really like to thank all of my panelists. You have been awesome to talk to. And I'd also like to thank Eva, who organized today's event. So thanks and goodbye for now.